Let's talk about DeepSeek because it is mind-blowing.
It's super impressive. I think we should take the development out of China very, very seriously.
Calling for a ban on DeepSeek.
In a world where AI giants shout their power, DeepSeek said almost nothing. No glitzy keynotes, no founder TED Talks, just silence until one morning in January 2025, they dropped a model that sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley. They called it DeepSeek R1.
DeepSeek's AI model has developed technology that can actually be competitive.
A chatbot so fast, so fluent, and so shockingly cheap to run that within 48 hours, NVIDIA stock had dropped 2%. US tech lost $1 trillion in market cap, and no one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. At the center of it all, Liang Wenfeng, a former fund manager turned AI disruptor, barely known in tech circles. Not a PhD, not a prodigy, just efficient, ruthlessly, mysteriously efficient. He founded DeepSeek in 2023, and by the start of 2025, he had the world's attention and suspicion. DeepSeek claimed R1 was trained in just 2 months on barely 2,000 NVIDIA H800s GPUs. Total cost, less than $6 million. For comparison, OpenAI's GPT-4 estimates ran north of 100 million. The numbers didn't add up. Users flocked to it. It was fast, intuitive, and somehow beat out OpenAI in translation and reasoning tests. It topped Apple's App Store in days. But the real headline wasn't user growth, it was geopolitics. On January 27, 2025, Reuters broke the story. US officials were investigating DeepSeek. How had a Chinese startup trained a frontier model under sanctions that banned the very chips needed to build it? The theory? They didn't innovate around the rules. They broke them. DeepSeek didn't respond, not to media, not to regulators, not even to investors. But behind the curtain, rumors were spreading about shadow shipments, about phantom data centers, and about a startup that may have hijacked the future of AI by hijacking the hardware itself. In artificial intelligence, code is only half the equation. The rest? Hardware. Specifically, NVIDIA's top-tier GPUs, the H100s, the H200s, and the elusive Blackwell line. They're the difference between chatbot and synthetic superintelligence. And in China, they're banned. By February 2025, US investigators had picked up a pattern. GPU shipments were leaving approved ports, then quietly vanishing. One company name popped up again and again: DeepSeek. But how were they doing it? That's when investigators uncovered what they called a phantom supply chain. Reports from insiders described a playbook built on illusion. DeepSeek's alleged suppliers would set up entire server farms in Southeast Asia. Legitimate builds, legal paperwork, full compliance. Then, once they passed inspection, they were dismantled, piece by piece, shipped quietly back to China. Singaporean authorities made the first crack in the case. In February, 3 men were charged with fraud tied to NVIDIA chip transfers. According to law enforcement, the trail led back to DeepSeek. In another scheme, smugglers allegedly rerouted GPUs through US warehouses. There, labels were swapped. NVIDIA was erased, replaced by Sanqian, a fictional company invented to fool customs. Once disguised, the chips moved as generic computer parts through Malaysia and on to China. The US government struck back. December 2025, Operation Gatekeeper. $50 million in chips seized, multiple arrests, an underground GPU trade exposed. And at the center, allegations swirling around one name, DeepSeek. NVIDIA called it far-fetched. They claimed there was no direct evidence that DeepSeek had obtained restricted chips. But inside NVIDIA, engineers were already building new countermeasures, chip telemetry systems to track rogue GPUs by location and load. A quiet war was underway, one fought in courtrooms, cargo bays, and firmware. DeepSeek didn't deny. It didn't explain. It didn't speak. When asked how a startup with no public funding and no listed suppliers trained a frontier model in record time, DeepSeek offered nothing. And the silence only made the story louder. By the start of August 2025, the US government had reached a conclusion. DeepSeek wasn't just a startup. It was a threat. Commerce officials said the company had likely misappropriated American technology. Senate leaders called for sanctions. Intelligence agencies flagged national security risks. And behind closed doors, they began asking, how do you control a ghost? While DeepSeek remained untouched, others were not so lucky. Chinese-American businessman Alan Hao Shu pled guilty to smuggling $160 million worth of banned chips from Texas to China. In Virginia, Ben Lin Wan and Fan Yu Tom Gong were indicted for shipping GPUs under false names. Their crimes, creating the backdoor pipeline that may have fueled DeepSeek's ascent. They called it the Sandkian Network, named for the fake brand used to mask NVIDIA chips. Through fake end-user certificates and warehouse laundering, the conspirators bypassed U.S. export bans. Many of those chips, prosecutors believe, were destined for unnamed Chinese AI labs. Though never mentioned by name, everyone knew who that was. On Capitol Hill, the DeepSeek story triggered a political firestorm. Lawmakers demanded a blacklist. Export controls were expanded. Emergency funding went to the Bureau of Industry and Security. Their goal? Plug every leak and lock down the compute advantage before it was too late. In mid-June, Italy launched its own probe, not into chips, but into DeepSeek's content. Investigators accused the AI app of spreading false and unverifiable information. The timing was no coincidence. By then, DeepSeek was no longer just a startup. It was a global disruptor, with no country willing to trust it. Caught in the middle was NVIDIA, the king of compute, the source of the silicon, and the company now facing a geopolitical dilemma. NVIDIA denied any wrongdoing, but in December they unveiled a new weapon, chip telemetry, software baked into every GPU, designed to verify where it runs. China called it a backdoor, the US called it compliance, NVIDIA just called it necessary. And DeepSeek? No arrests, no entity listing, no confirmed penalty. They didn't deny, they didn't explain, and perhaps that's the strategy. A silent company, standing just outside the reach of the world's loudest governments. By late 2025, one truth was clear. Artificial intelligence was no longer just an innovation. It was infrastructure. And in Washington, a quiet mantra had begun to circulate. Whoever controls the chips controls the future. China's ambitions were no secret. The goal, AI supremacy by 2030. But even with local efforts, Cambricon, Ascend, Alibaba's Hangguang, the crown jewels remained American. NVIDIA's GPUs powered nearly every major model, including, according to US investigators, DeepSeek's. In response, the US tightened the screws. A100s, banned. H100s, banned. Even cloud access from China was scrutinized. But cracks emerged. Some lawmakers warned that banning too much could backfire, giving China every reason to accelerate homegrown silicon. In December, President Trump authorized a partial rollback. The Hopper H200 GPU could be exported to China for a 25% export fee. It was a compromise designed to protect US companies while keeping the most powerful chips, like the Blackwell series, out of Chinese hands. DeepSeek, for its part, called the ban a blessing. In one interview, its team said US sanctions had forced China to become more efficient. But critics weren't buying it. They pointed to the company's own admissions that lack of top-tier US chips was the biggest roadblock to its success. A paradox. DeepSeek had become the poster child of banned tech that ran on banned tech. DeepSeek's model kept improving, and unlike Western firms, it never charged, never advertised, never explained. But it performed, and that performance, despite sanctions, was an indictment of the export regime itself. Had the US safeguarded its tech, or just made its rivals faster, cheaper, and harder to track? The AI race was no longer just commercial. It was military, regulatory, philosophical. And DeepSeek, for all its silence, had become a case study in how quickly the global rules of power could shift. Because what it did wasn't just build a model, it cracked the code on how to get the chips needed to build the next one. In the months following the investigations, DeepSeek never issued a statement. No press conference, no rebuttal, no tweet. Not when accused of using smuggled US hardware. Not when linked to Chinese intelligence. Not even when asked how a tiny Hangzhou startup trained a frontier model on a startup's budget. Multiple governments dug into the paper trail. From Singapore to Washington, names surfaced. Shell companies, fake brands, straw purchasers. But DeepSeek itself, still not blacklisted, still not charged, still operational. Inside US intelligence briefings, DeepSeek now appears on slides next to names like Huawei and ByteDance. One official called it a Tier 1 AI actor operating in the gray zone. Another warned it was only a matter of time before its model served military applications. And yet, there is no legal action, just watch lists and silence. By the close of 2025, DeepSeek had neither slowed nor explained. Despite global scrutiny, the company showed no sign of retreat. Analysts watched quietly as compute activity surged. Whether it's the groundwork for a successor model or just business as usual, no one can say for certain. But if history is any guide, DeepSeek never stops building. So now we're left with questions. Not about what happened, but what happens next. Can US export controls actually work in a globalized tech economy? Will China race ahead by rewriting the rules or ignoring them altogether? And perhaps the most important, if AI is the future of power, who decides who gets to hold it? It's easy to think of artificial intelligence as lines of code. But behind the models are machines. Machines that were built, shipped, and smuggled. And those machines, they remember. Not what they were told, but where they were, what they trained, and who put them there. And one day they may remember more than we want them to.